I believe that empathy is a valuable human trait, but when it is misdirected, it can lead to significant problems in society. One such issue is the overreaching power of the government and the loss of liberty. In this article I am going to briefly discuss how misplaced empathy manipulates the business cycle. I do believe it's the government that causes the business cycle and its booms and busts. This is a common sentiment among monetarist and Austrian economists like Milton Friedman and Ludwig von Mises, respectively. The basic idea is that the government inflates the money supply and lowers the Fed rate, causing a boom cycle in the economy. This causes inflation, leading to the bust cycle we call a recession. Oftentimes the government goes a step further by tightening the money supply and raising rates severely, which leads to depression. This is what happened prior to the Great Depression of the 1930s. While in an economic depression, citizens begin to ask questions and wonder why things have gotten so bad. They start to look to the government, and the government has no new answers to the age-old question of what causes economic hardship. So, big government decides to start spending money again, oftentimes on welfare programs that the people enjoy and the politicians like because it gets them votes. They also prefer to bail out their buddies for trillions of dollars more. This massive overspending continues, and we start a new business cycle, with absolutely no one learning anything whatsoever. Empathy is a virtue. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It is a virtuous emotion that drives us to assist others and make the world a better place. The father of economics, Adam Smith, wrote his first book on empathy. It was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and it is a much easier read than his more famous work, The Wealth of Nations. Here's Adam Smith's definition of empathy below. He's basically describing how people feel what others feel, which is empathy. As we have no immediate experience of what other men feel, we can form no idea of the manner in which they are affected, but by conceiving what we ourselves should feel in the like situation. Though our brother is upon the rack, as long as we ourselves are at our ease, our senses will never inform us of what he suffers. They never did, and never can, carry us beyond our own person, and it is by the imagination only that we can form any conception of what are his sensations. Neither can that faculty help us to this any other way, than by representing to us what would be our own, if we were in his case. It is the impressions of our own senses only, not those of his, which our imaginations copy. By the imagination we place ourselves in his situation, we conceive ourselves enduring all the same torments, we enter as it were into his body, and become in some measure the same person with him, and thence form some idea of his sensations, and even feel something which, though weaker in degree, is not altogether unlike them. His agonies, when they are thus brought home to ourselves, when we have thus adopted and made them our own, begin at last to affect us, and we then tremble and shudder at the thought of what he feels. For as to be in pain or distress of any kind excites the most excessive sorrow, so to conceive or to imagine that we are in it, excites some degree of the same emotion, 3 inches proportion to the vivacity or dullness of the conception. However, misplaced empathy can lead to negative consequences when it drives support for policies that harm others or restrict individual freedom. As Milton Friedman says, the greatest threat to freedom is the concentration of power. Welfare state. One example of misplaced empathy is the growth of the welfare state. Proponents argue that it is necessary to aid the less fortunate, appealing to our empathy for those in need. However, the reality is that the welfare state often creates a cycle of dependency and fails to effectively reduce poverty. The expansion of the welfare state increases government control and limits individual freedom. Every time there is a recession or a pandemic hits, people look to the guy with the biggest stick. The motivation for someone to do something leads to the government stepping in to subsidize people for not working, leading to greater authority over the general populace. Coronavirus. As we saw during coronavirus, bailing out low-income workers only pushed the recession back a couple of years and led to massive amounts of unsustainable inflation. Many regular people have had their savings and investments eroded by 8% inflation, making it more difficult to retire someday. The Federal Reserve must now intentionally create a recession to stamp out ever-increasing inflation rates. They do this by raising interest rates and lowering the money supply. Once more people start losing jobs, they look to the government again, starting a new business cycle. Then the government uses belief in Keynesian economics to try to spend its way out of a recession once again, thus creating a bubble. In the past 20 years, we have seen this multiple times in the stock and housing markets. Next, those markets inevitably crash after being pumped up by new money the Federal Reserve lent out, and the cycle continues unabated. It is up for debate whether the main problem is the Federal Reserve or human nature and its tendency to look to someone else to solve its problems. Bailouts. Are bailouts a necessary evil, or could we survive if numerous banks became insolvent? That is the question for the ages. None of my money was at SVB or any of the other recent failures. Their major mistake was investing in environmental social governance, ESG, and other treehugger bullshit. I don't want to invest in those companies, and neither should you. But here's the problem: these banks that are failing were probably invested in numerous things that I do benefit from. Many claim that if the banking industry goes, so goes the country. But it sure seems that every time one of these goes under, it's rich folks getting the most money and the golden parachutes. This is all another example of misplaced empathy is the bailout of failing industries. Politicians argue that it is necessary to save jobs and protect the economy, appealing to our empathy for those who may be negatively impacted. However, this practice often leads to the subsidization of failing companies, with taxpayer dollars propping up industries that are not competitive. The result is a transfer of wealth from hardworking citizens to struggling companies and a further concentration of power in the hands of the government. If the government has to get involved, it would be better for it to help people, not save businesses or industries. It should function as a stopgap between jobs and not a permanent method of income for banksters. Subsidies. Misplaced empathy also drives subsidies to industry. Politicians argue that it is necessary to support certain industries, appealing to our empathy for those who may be negatively impacted if the industry fails. However, subsidies often distort the market and result in an unequal distribution of resources. Companies that receive subsidies are given an unfair advantage over their competitors, leading to a concentration of power in the hands of a select few. The majority of the boxed goods in the grocery store are a result of corn subsidies. If these did not exist, it seems like America might not have its obesity problem. In summation. In conclusion, I believe that liberty is essential to a free and prosperous society. Misplaced empathy can lead to the expansion of government power and the restriction of individual freedom. We must guard against this threat and fight to preserve liberty for all. This should involve a degree of belt-tightening during a recession.